I thought I had everything figured out. For 2 years, Emily and I were solid. We met during undergrad at a small college in Michigan. She was majoring in marketing, and I was on the nursing track. We clicked fast. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, like even the worst days could be turned around if she was there. We didn't just talk about the future, we planned it. She'd joke about how she'd decorate our first place together, and I'd laugh, pretending to hate the idea of floral curtains. We had names picked out for kids we didn't even have yet. She loved Harper for a girl, and I thought Mason was cool for a boy. It wasn't just daydreaming. It felt real. I was finishing my grad program and already thinking about proposing. I hadn't told her yet, but I'd spent weeks searching for the perfect ring. It was all mapped out in my head. How I'd do it, how she'd react, everything. Emily was always supportive of my goals, even with how demanding my schedule was. Nursing isn't exactly a 9-to-5 kind of thing, and my closest friends were mostly women. It wasn't something I thought twice about. Maddie, my best friend from nursing school, had been like family to me. Sophie, a coworker I'd met during my first ER rotation, was someone I could vent to when the job got overwhelming. I told Emily about them early on. I wanted to be upfront, to avoid any weird tension. At first, she seemed fine with it. She even joked about how Maddie probably knew more about my stress levels than she did. But now that I look back, there were moments, little cracks I ignored. Things started feeling different around New Year's. We were at a party at one of her friends' places, and I noticed she was quieter than usual. Emily wasn't much of a drinker, but that night, she had a few too many. Out of nowhere, she blurted out, "I don't trust Maddie or Sophie." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke, but her face didn't change. I asked what she meant, and she shrugged, mumbling something about how she wasn't sure if I'd had a thing with either of them before we started dating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I told her, calmly at first, that nothing like that had ever happened. Maddie and Sophie were friends, nothing more. But Emily just gave me this look, like she didn't believe me. The next morning, when we were both sober, I brought it up again. I explained everything. Maddie was the first person I connected with when I moved out of state for school. She'd been there during some of the hardest times of my life. Sophie? She was someone I relied on during insane shifts at the hospital. Both of them were important to me, but not in the way Emily thought. Emily apologized, said she overreacted, and promised she trusted me. I wanted to believe her. For a while, I did. But things didn't feel the same after that. She started pulling back in subtle ways. Shorter texts, less excitement about the things we used to talk about. When I mentioned plans for us to move in together after graduation, she nodded along, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I figured she was stressed. Between her full-time job and night classes, she was always on the go. I didn't press her about it. I thought she just needed some time. But then, I found out she'd been talking to an old high school friend, Ryan. I didn't know him well, but I'd met him once at a party. He barely acknowledged me, which already rubbed me the wrong way. Apparently, they'd been texting about us, about me. Emily told me he thought I was hiding something, that I was being too close to my friends. When she told me this, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. She was letting someone who didn't know me, someone she hadn't seen in years, dictate how she felt about our relationship. It all came to a head one night when she looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't know if I can trust you." Those words hit harder than I thought they would. I'd done everything to make her feel secure. I never hid anything from her. My phone wasn't locked. She could pick it up anytime. I'd gone out of my way to set clear boundaries with Maddie and Sophie, just so Emily wouldn't feel weird about it. But none of that seemed to matter. We argued for hours. I asked her what she wanted me to do to fix things, but she just shook her head and said she didn't know. By the end of the night, she suggested we take a break. I hated the idea, but she was already halfway out the door. I agreed, thinking some time apart would give her clarity, that she'd realize how much she meant to me and how wrong she was about everything. I really thought we'd come back from it. I told myself it was just a pause. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her for good. The first few days of the break felt like living in limbo. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that Emily just needed time to sort through her doubts. But the silence between us was deafening. After 2 years of constant communication, good morning texts, random memes in the middle of the day, late-night calls, It was like someone had flipped a switch. Every morning, I'd wake up and instinctively reach for my phone, expecting something from her. A simple hi, or even just a stupid emoji would have been enough to make me feel like there was still hope. But my notifications stayed empty, and every day felt heavier than the last. I tried to keep busy. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, buried myself in study sessions, and even cleaned my apartment from top to bottom, twice. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, Emily was always there in the back of my mind. I kept replaying our last conversation, wondering if there was something I could have said or done differently to make her stay. Friends started noticing something was off. Maddie, especially, could tell I wasn't myself. She cornered me during a break at work one day, asking if I was okay. I brushed her off, muttering something about stress from school, but she didn't buy it. "You've been quieter than usual," she said, giving me that knowing look. "And you've been avoiding Sophie, which is weird. Did something happen?" I froze for a moment, not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to spill everything, to tell her about Emily's accusations and how it was tearing me apart. But I couldn't bring myself to drag Maddie into it. It wasn't her fault Emily didn't trust me. So I just shrugged and said, "It's nothing. I'm fine." She didn't push, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Weeks passed, and the silence from Emily stretched longer and longer. I kept waiting for her to reach out, to say she'd thought things through and wanted to talk. But there was nothing, just the same empty phone screen every morning. Around the third week, I caved and texted her. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple, "Hey, hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, waiting for those 3 little dots to appear. They never did. That was when it started to sink in. Maybe this wasn't just a break. Maybe she wasn't coming back. The thought of it made me sick. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with a million questions. Was she talking to Ryan? Was he telling her more lies about me? Did she even miss me? One night, I cracked and scrolled through our old messages. It was a mistake. Seeing all those sweet texts, the plans we'd made, the inside jokes only we understood. It was like twisting the knife deeper. I ended up deleting the entire thread, thinking it would help. It didn't. I threw myself even harder into work. I volunteered for night shifts, signed up for extra training sessions, anything to keep myself busy. The chaos of the ER was a good distraction, but as soon as I walked out of the hospital doors, the weight of everything would hit me again. Then, about 5 weeks into the break, I got a text from her. It was short and to the point. "Can we talk? In person?" My heart jumped when I saw her name on my screen. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe she'd realized she was wrong, that I'd never lied to her, that she still wanted a future with me. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her place. I spent the entire drive there rehearsing what I wanted to say. I pictured her apologizing, saying she missed me, that she wanted to fix things. I imagined myself telling her I forgave her, that we could start fresh. But when I walked in and saw her sitting at a corner table, I knew something was off. She looked nervous, almost scared, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. She didn't even smile when she saw me. "Hey," I said, sitting down across from her. She looked up at me, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long, awkward pause. I waited for her to speak, but she just sat there, staring at her hands. Finally, I broke the silence. "What's going on, Emily?" She took a deep breath, then blurted out, "I made a mistake." Those 3 words hung in the air like a lead weight. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then looked me in the eyes. I hooked up with someone, a coworker. It happened after we decided to take a break. Twice. The world felt like it tilted sideways. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Her words kept echoing in my head. "I made a mistake. Twice." She started rambling, trying to explain. I was confused, and I felt so hurt. Ryan kept telling me I couldn't trust you, and I didn't know what to believe. I wasn't thinking straight. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I barely heard her. All I could think about was the irony of it all. She'd accused me of being unfaithful, of lying about Maddie and Sophie, and now here she was, admitting she'd done the exact thing she couldn't forgive me for. Why are you telling me this? I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. Because you deserve to know, she said, tears streaming down her face. And because I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you the truth. I sat there, staring at her, feeling like a stranger had taken the place of the person I thought I knew. After everything we'd been through, after all the trust I'd put in her, this was how it ended. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I need time to think, I said, my voice cold. She tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. Please, I can't do this right now, Emily, I said, cutting her off. I need space. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't sure if there was anything left to salvage. The drive home from the coffee shop was a blur. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and my chest felt like it was caving in. Her words kept replaying in my head, over and over. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. How could it not mean anything? How do you do something like that and call it meaningless? When I got home, I just sat in my car for a while, staring at the dashboard. I didn't even know what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Sadness? It was all mixed together into this chaotic mess that I couldn't untangle. I finally forced myself to go inside, but I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped my keys on the counter, sank onto the couch, and sat there in the dark, my thoughts spiraling. I kept thinking about every moment with her, every smile, every conversation about our future. It felt like all of it had been ripped apart. The person I thought I knew, the person I was ready to spend my life with, had turned into someone unrecognizable. The next day, I ignored her texts. There were a few of them, all apologizing, all asking if we could talk again. I couldn't even bring myself to open them. What was there left to say? She'd made her choice, and I had to figure out what to do with the wreckage she'd left behind. I threw myself into work harder than ever. The hospital became my escape, a place where I could focus on something other than my own misery. There was no time to dwell on Emily when I was running from room to room, checking on patients, coordinating with the rest of the team. But the second my shift ended, the weight of it all came crashing back. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. Was she still talking to him? Was she lying about it being over? Did she even regret what she'd done? Or was she just saying what she thought I wanted to hear? One night, after hours of tossing and turning, I broke. I grabbed my phone and started typing out a message. How could you do this to me? After everything we've been through? But I couldn't send it. What was the point? No text would undo what she'd done. No explanation would make it hurt less. I thought about blocking her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. As much as I hated admitting it, part of me still wanted her to reach out, to try harder, to somehow prove she was sorry in a way that felt real. But every time her name popped up on my screen, it just made everything worse. A few weeks passed, and I started to notice how much the breakup was affecting me physically. I was exhausted all the time, barely eating, and my chest felt tight constantly, like I couldn't take a full breath. One morning, I had a full-blown panic attack while getting ready for work. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't button my shirt, and I had to sit on the bathroom floor just to calm down. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep doing this to myself. I was spiraling, and if I didn't do something to pull myself out of it, I was going to crash completely. I reached out to my best friend, Mark, and told him everything. It was the first time I'd said it all out loud, and it felt like ripping off a bandage. Mark listened without interrupting, nodding as I poured my heart out. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what to do, but I will say this. You deserve better than what she gave you. And the longer you hold on to this, the more power she has over you. Don't let her keep controlling your life." His words hit me like a brick. He was right. I'd been letting Emily take up space in my head, letting her choices dictate how I felt about myself. She wasn't even in my life anymore, but it was like she still had this invisible hold on me. The next day, I made a decision. I blocked her number, unfollowed her on every platform, and packed up everything that reminded me of her. Pictures, notes, the little trinkets she'd given me over the years. I put it all in a box and shoved it in the back of my closet. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it felt like a necessary step. It didn't fix everything overnight. The pain was still there, and the memories didn't just disappear. But for the first time, I felt like I was taking control. I wasn't just waiting for her to decide what would happen next. I was choosing to move forward, even if it was messy and painful. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel small moments of relief. They were fleeting at first, a random hour where I wasn't thinking about her, a conversation with a coworker that made me laugh. But those moments started adding up, and slowly, I began to feel like myself again. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to figure it out on my own terms. Moving on wasn't a straight path. Some days, it felt like I was making real progress. I'd wake up, go for a run, work a shift, and go to bed without thinking about Emily once. But other days, she'd creep back into my thoughts like an unwelcome guest. I'd hear a song we used to play on lazy Sunday mornings, or pass a restaurant where we'd had one of our date night dinners, and suddenly, it felt like I was back at square one. The hardest part wasn't even missing her anymore. It was the lingering questions. I couldn't stop wondering if any of it had been real. Had she always doubted me? Was she lying when she said she loved me? Or did that change somewhere along the way? The not knowing ate away at me, even as I tried to move forward. Mark and Maddie were my anchors during that time. Mark kept me grounded with his no-nonsense advice, and Maddie was just there. She didn't ask too many questions, or try to push me into talking about things I wasn't ready to share. She had this way of making me feel normal again, like I wasn't just the guy who got his heart broken. One night, Maddie convinced me to join a group of coworkers for drinks after a long shift. At first, I wasn't sure about it. The idea of sitting in a noisy bar surrounded by people laughing and talking felt overwhelming. But something in her tone made it hard to say no. "Come on, you need this," she said, nudging my shoulder as we walked out of the hospital. "One drink. If you hate it, you can leave, and I promise I won't hold it against you." I sighed but agreed. Fine. One drink. It ended up being exactly what I needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed without forcing it. I told dumb stories about ridiculous patients, and everyone chimed in with their own. By the time I got home, I realized it was the first evening in months where I hadn't spent hours obsessing over Emily. Little by little, I started saying yes to more things, grabbing coffee with friends, going to a baseball game Mark dragged me to, even signing up for a local 5K. Each small step felt like a victory, proof that I could build a life that wasn't tied to her. One day, while cleaning out my apartment, I found the notebook I'd started using during the breakup. Flipping through it, I was struck by how much anger and pain I'd poured into those pages. It was raw, messy, and full of the kind of thoughts I'd never said out loud. But as I kept reading, I noticed a shift. The later entries weren't as bitter. They were more reflective, more focused on what I wanted for myself instead of what I'd lost. I sat down and started writing again, but this time it wasn't about her. I wrote about the things that made me feel alive, the way the air felt during an early morning run, the satisfaction of finishing a tough shift at work, the laughter I'd shared with Maddie and the others at the bar. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't writing to vent. I was writing to remind myself of the good things still in my life. One night, after a long run, I found myself standing on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace. The ache in my chest wasn't completely gone, but it didn't feel all-consuming anymore. It was just there, in the background, like a scar I was learning to live with. I didn't hate Emily anymore. I didn't forgive her, either, but the anger that had burned so fiercely in the beginning had started to fade. What she'd done was wrong, and it hurt, but holding on to that pain wasn't going to help me heal. The more I let go of her, the more I felt like I was rediscovering myself. I started setting goals that had nothing to do with anyone else, traveling to places I'd always wanted to see, taking a woodworking class I'd been putting off, and even signing up for a marathon. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of who I was before everything fell apart. Life wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. There were still moments when the memories crept back in, but they didn't hit as hard as they used to. They were just echoes now, reminders of a chapter that had ended. One evening, Mark and I were sitting on his porch, beers in hand, talking about nothing in particular. Out of nowhere, he said, "You know, you seem a lot better. Like, lighter, I guess." I thought about it for a second and nodded. "Yeah, I think I am," I said. "It's weird, though. For a while, I didn't think I'd ever get here." He grinned. "Told you it was just a matter of time." He was right. It had taken months of pain, doubt, and frustration, but I was finally starting to feel like myself again. And for the first time, I wasn't looking backward. I was looking ahead. Things were finally falling into place. I wouldn't say I was fully healed. There were still moments where a memory or a passing thought about Emily would hit me out of nowhere, but they didn't carry the same weight anymore. I was building a new routine, one that didn't revolve around her. Then, out of nowhere, she showed up. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the middle of organizing my apartment. I'd been putting off cleaning for weeks, and it felt good to finally get things in order. There was a knock at the door, and I figured it was a delivery or maybe Mark stopping by unannounced, like he sometimes did. When I opened the door and saw Emily standing there, holding a baby in her arms, my mind went completely blank. It was like my brain short-circuited, unable to process what I was looking at. "Hi," she said, her voice soft and hesitant, like she wasn't sure if I was going to slam the door in her face. "Emily?" I finally managed to say, my voice sharper than I intended. My eyes darted to the baby, then back to her. What are you doing here?" She shifted nervously, adjusting the baby in her arms. He was small, bundled up in a light blue onesie, his eyes closed as he slept. "Can I come in?" she asked. I didn't move. "Why?" She swallowed hard, looking down at the baby and then back at me. "We need to talk," she said. "It's about him." I took a step back, leaning against the doorframe. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Emily, I don't know what you think this is, but—" "He's yours," she blurted out, cutting me off. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What?" "The baby," she said, her voice trembling. "He's yours." For a second, all I could do was laugh. This bitter, disbelieving sound that didn't even feel like it came from me. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Emily, we haven't been together in months. And you told me that you hooked up with someone else." She nodded quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, and I hate how this happened. But I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after we went on the break. I did the math, and it lines up. He's yours." I shook my head, stepping back further. "No way. You don't get to just show up here after everything and drop this on me. You don't get to do that, Emily." "I didn't know what to do," she said, her voice cracking. "I was scared, and I didn't think you'd believe me. But then, I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I had to tell you." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of it all. "Where's the guy?" I asked. "The one you were with?" She looked down at the baby, avoiding my gaze. "He's gone," she said quietly. "He didn't want anything to do with us. He left." Of course he did. I clenched my jaw, fighting the anger rising in my chest. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice cold. "You cheated on me, got pregnant, and now that he's out of the picture, you're here, expecting me to, what? Play dad?" "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said quickly. "I just thought you deserved to know. He's your son, and he deserves a family." I laughed again, this time louder, angrier. "A family?" I said. "Emily, you destroyed our family the second you decided I wasn't enough for you. You made your choice, and now you want to come back like none of that happened?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I'm trying to do what's right for him." I looked at the baby again, still sleeping peacefully in her arms. He had no idea what kind of chaos he'd been born into. And for a split second, I felt something, sympathy. Maybe? Not for her, but for him. He didn't ask for any of this. But that didn't change the fact that I couldn't trust her. "I need proof," I said finally, my voice flat. "If you really believe he's mine, then you'll get a paternity test. Until then, don't come back here. She nodded, wiping at her cheeks. I'll do it, she said. I'll do whatever it takes. Good, I said, stepping back and holding the door open. Now go. She hesitated for a moment, like she wanted to say something else, but then she turned and walked away. I closed the door behind her and stood there, leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. My mind was spinning. Was she telling the truth? Could the baby really be mine? And if he was, what the hell was I supposed to do? The paternity test came back 3 weeks later. I opened the envelope with shaking hands, sitting alone in my apartment, the silence around me deafening. My chest felt tight as I scanned the results. He wasn't mine. Relief hit me first, rushing through me so quickly I almost laughed. But it was short-lived, replaced by something heavier. Sadness, maybe? Not for her, but for the baby. This innocent kid caught in the middle of her mistakes. Emily tried reaching out after that, sending a long, rambling text about how sorry she was, how she didn't know what to do next. I didn't reply. What was left to say? She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I blocked her number the same day, and finally felt the weight lift for good. This was the closure I didn't realize I needed. It wasn't about revenge or making her feel as bad as I did. It was about finally being free of the ghost of our relationship. That night, I went for a run. The air was cold, crisp, stinging my lungs, but it felt good. I ran further than I'd planned, letting my thoughts drift. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking backward. When I got home, I opened my notebook, wrote 2 words at the top of a blank page, and underlined them, moving on. Then I closed it, set it aside, and smiled. It was over. Really, truly over. And I was finally ready for whatever came next.